Have you been affected by Nintendo's marketing and bought something that sat on a shelf only after a few hours of activity? Whether that be through getting their users to buy bundles of DLC for only one item, or selling an unfinished product with the free update system, there's no doubt that Nintendo has caught on to this make money fast trend from modern video game companies. But honestly, this system has been around for quite some time now. Being able to sell worthless accessories with the Nintendo seal of approval slapped on the box has always been a thing. And a disclaimer for this video, I'm not going to mention things like Amiibo or the e-reader because I genuinely think these products are cool and have a gimmick that are worth collecting. Starting with the NES. There is a pretty big list of accessories sold that honestly I could go on and on and on about, but this sort of revival era of the video game market crash of 1983 is expected to have these items. With Nintendo riding high with the release of their new console, a plethora of useless product was bound to be sold, starting with Konami's Laser Scope. Released in 1991, this headset was a different take on the same functionality as the NES Zapper, except you'd be in full control without the use of your hands. Using a sight over your eyes, the player would aim focus at their designated target on screen and yell "Fire!" into the microphone in hopes that it would work. Of course, it wouldn't be in this video if it actually worked. The accuracy of the headset was horrible and the microphone would just be set off with any noises made in the area. A lot of these early gaming products on paper were such cool ideas, but when they actually hit the shelves, they usually never worked for the consumer like they were supposed to. Next for the NES is LJN's Rollin' Rocker. Released in 1989, I guess when it comes to trying to incorporate different ways of playing a video game, for whatever reason this balance board type of controller was a horrible idea that should have never come up. The player would use the device as a physical motion D-pad whilst holding the controller in order to use the A and B buttons. Most of the time, the controller was unresponsive and just never really worked the way it was intended, and I can't imagine a child looking forward to playing on this abomination of a balance board for hours at a time. It seems like a gimmick that should have been killed instantly. I actually managed to buy one of these from an antique shop a few years back because I had never seen one and I thought it'd be a funny bit for a video, but I'm kind of afraid if I stand on it I'll break it. Last on the list for the NES is Pressman's NES Speedboard. Just looking at this product, it's sad to think that this piece of plastic was being sold just to hold your controller. Released in 1991, the Speedboard was designed to hold your controller down so that the player could smack the buttons faster without having to use their full hands. Even the box says it's the fastest way to play your NES, and that the Speedboard would increase your game scores with better reaction time and speed. It's obvious how much of a scam this thing was, and I don't want to give it any more screen time, so let's just move on. Entering the mid-90s, the world saw the release of the glorious Nintendo 64 with all new 64-bit technology. This huge upgrade in graphics only meant one thing, well, maybe two things. Better games and more dogshit accessories to try and sell. Of course there's microphones and mice, but these have such unique games behind them that they seem to be worth collecting, to me at least. The Nintendo 64 had quite a few different takes on controllers depending on what type of game you were playing. For instance, there's the Siricon 64 and Rumble Rod fishing controllers made for fishing games, which is actually kinda cool. But what's not cool is Reality Quest Nintendo 64 glove controller. Much like the Power Glove made for the NES, the Nintendo 64 managed to get its own designed glove. But once again, the functions on these controllers were always so shoddy and just should have never been made in the first place. The only reason I added this one to the list and not the NES's Power Glove is because this one is a little bit more rare and is just a second iteration of another glove controller. I suppose the NES's controller is much more of a collector's piece. Now, I'll be talking about quite a few Nintendo 64 packs right now, but just hear me out. The Nintendo 64's controller pack was pretty much just a memory card that was used in the early days of the Nintendo 64's library. It allowed players to exchange data through this and also helped out with games that had bigger save files. I really don't see a point in this because many games later on didn't need this, but I guess at the time it might have been worth it. And the next set of accessories are kind of quick hot takes because they have some purpose to them, but I feel like they're just not big enough to not call them useless. These being the Rumble Pack, Transfer Pack, and the Expansion Pack. Hear me out once again. The Rumble Pack just gave your controller vibration, which is cool I guess, and kind of set a standard for rumble in controllers, but I could see the point of a parent not wanting to buy this for their kid at the time because it's not entirely game changing. The Transfer Pack, although it is definitely a cool idea, when it comes to being able to use Game Boy games on your Nintendo 64 for certain games, I feel like this accessory could have been a lot more than just for unlocking characters or transferring data. If somehow Nintendo was able to make this accessory actually play Game Boy games on your Nintendo 64, this would have been a much bigger deal back then. I know you can do this in Pokemon Stadium, but more games, you know? There was the Wide Boy 64, in which you could actually play Game Boy games on your home console, kind of like the Super Game Boy that released for the SNES, but this was really only available to developers for big events, such as the Pokemon League Summer Training Tour of 1999. Now, the expansion pack. I wasn't going to put this one on the list because it does make changes to a lot of games, but it's the fact that the big selling point of the expansion pack was that it was required to play like only 3 out of the total 300 plus games within the Nintendo 64 library. The main function of the expansion pack, in case you didn't know, was to double the amount of RAM from originally 4 megabytes included with the base console to now 8 megabytes. Donkey Kong 64 was the first of the games to utilize this pack, as the game wouldn't boot without it. So this led for Nintendo to bundle the game alongside with it so that buyers weren't confused as to why their game wasn't starting. The second game being Majora's Mask, in which once again without it, no booting. And it allowed for more on-screen characters as well as enhanced graphics and textures. And technically, the third game being Perfect Dark, because without the expansion pack installed, the player was pretty much locked out of a third of the entire game. The expansion pack can enhance graphics for other games as well, but I feel like at the time, was 64-bit really needing a boost in graphics? There were literally so many more of these accessory packs created by third-party companies, but they all pretty much just serve the same purpose, either vibrating your controller or just giving the player more save data. Leaving cartridges behind and moving on into a new millennium, Nintendo greeted its fans of every age with the release of their brand new console, the Nintendo GameCube. At the time, Nintendo was already a year behind with Sony's newest gaming console leading the market, the PlayStation 2. This sick new console was able to play games and watch DVD movies. This was just the beginning of Nintendo trying to stay afloat in a brand new modern tech world. Now, personally, I think the GameCube has some pretty rad accessories such as the Game Boy Player, allowing the newest generation of Game Boy games to be played right on the home console with the GameCube controller as well is pretty cool. Or even the e-reader and link cables that allowed for new content and games to be scanned in or different ways to play multiplayer. Although these accessories have some limited uses to them, it's not as bad as the GameCube broadband adapter. Once again, in a new modern tech world where the internet was becoming more widespread, Nintendo thought to dip their toes into internet functionality for their new console. They consistently bounced around on ideas with online gaming and found out that it really wasn't their thing. Mainly because Microsoft and Sony were at the top of the pyramid for this type of stuff, and Nintendo wanted to keep the quality of their games at the highest standard. Wish they would do that now. The broadband or modem adapter attached into the bottom of the GameCube and allowed for an Ethernet cable to be plugged into its side port, allowing the use of online and LAN connectivity. This thing only worked for like 5 games and basically 2 of them had online functionality. The 3 LAN games being Mario Kart Double Dash, 1080 Degrees Avalanche, and Kirby Air Ride. This was probably the best way to play racing games with friends at the time, as multiple players were able to play on separate consoles and TVs within the same room. Hence the name LAN, or Local Area Network. The other 2 games, Phantasy Star Online Episode 1 and 2 and Episode 3, were, you guessed it, the only games that could be played online. For a small fee of $9 a month, you were able to connect with up to 1,000 people on a server. To this day, there's still a small dedicated community of players that are able to play with each other years after the official servers have been shut down. Oh, and what's that you see in the picture? Well, that's next on the list of useless GameCube accessories. That thing is a real controller known as the GameCube ASCII keyboard controller. Released only in Japan, this keyboard controller was made exclusively for Phantasy Star Online Episode 1 and 2, and made it obviously easier to communicate with players online. Although I think this controller is pretty much useless to those outside of the PSO community, I honestly think this thing is so badass and just a really cool piece to have in a collection. Right now, this controller is being sold online for up to like $200, which is quite a bit of money when you can only use it for one game. And wow, $200? That's a great segue, because if I had an extra $200, I would buy the GameCube component cable. This one kinda hurts. The release of Nintendo's GameCube had its first model loaded with 2 separate video ports on the back, one being for the regular composite cable that everyone is used to seeing, having red, yellow, and white wires, and the other being for the component cable using red, blue, and green wires. In the wonderful time of the early 2000s, TVs all kinda looked the same, a big back end and the common red, yellow, and white ports to plug in your video devices. But if you were one of them fancy folks, the back of your TV had an additional set of red, blue, and green ports made for higher quality video. To make it simple, component cables were just able to put out nicer, cleaner 480p video. This would become the first setback, as not many people would be able to use this cable. At the time as well, the GameCube's component cable was only being sold online by Nintendo themselves. On top of already having 2 setbacks to a restricted group of users during the GameCube's launch years, the hardware within the cable was quite unique in itself. This led to no third party being able to really replicate and make any off-brand wires at the time. Of course, now, many years later, there are modern adapters that can upscale and add things such as anti-aliasing, but back then Nintendo made sure no one would be able to profit off of this. This wire was made for a specific group of people, which all I got from it was that Nintendo didn't really need to make this product in the first place. It's as if Nintendo knew that years later they would rise to the surface with the release of the Nintendo Wii. Having a system that was aimed to sell to literally everyone, young and old, allowed for Nintendo to keep going at it with their silly, goofy gimmicks and ideas. I guess as a kid, I remember the Wii the most because there was so much bizarre stuff coming out with it that my little kid brain wanted everything, no matter how dumb it might have been. To start off, the amount of plastic accessories that were being sold for this console is absurd. All the plastic in the ocean? Yeah, that's all because of the Wii. Plastic wheels, plastic guns, plastic rackets, clubs, baseball bats, paddles, plastic frisbees, like why? These don't need much more of an explanation. I think the whole gimmick idea of, hey look at me, I'm playing golf on the Wii, but I have a plastic golf club in my hand so it feels real, had to have been the biggest dupe on Wii buyers. Like, why would you buy a plastic bowling ball? To go along with your useless plastic Wii accessories, let's take a look at the top item that always shows up in thrift stores. The Wii Balance Board. I know that this thing had quite a few games that would make use of it, but in the end you can't help but admit that this thing seriously had no purpose. Released alongside Wii Fit, the balance board was to be used as an exercise tool for the player. Quotations needed because this definitely was not marketed for a gamer. This is the pinnacle of Nintendo marketing the Wii as fun for everyone. You were able to use it in other games such as Wii Music and Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, where stepping and balancing is all the fun in the board, but I can't help but to recall back to the NES's Rollin' Rocker wanting to use the player's body as a controller. Honestly, I have no clue why my parents bought this for my brother and I as kids, but I just know this thing feels like a fever dream every time I see it. You know, microphones weren't going to be put on this list because of games like Mario Party 6 and Hey You Pikachu, but there's one microphone that will not go overlooked. The Wii Speak was Nintendo's attempt at allowing voice communication through the Wii. Why? I don't know. The first game that allowed the use of the microphone was Animal Crossing City Folk? Once again, why? I don't know. By playing City Folk online through Nintendo's Wi-Fi connection, you were able to talk to whoever else you were playing with the use of the microphone. There were other games such as Endless Ocean 2 and Uno with multiplayer and party game functions in which you would obviously use a microphone to talk to other players. Not to mention that you would be spending $30 on a microphone that could only work for the Wii. If you tried using it on anything else, you couldn't. I will say, at least this thing doesn't sound as bad as Xbox's Kinect mic. I don't think there's much else to say because how much more in depth can I go into explaining a microphone? There were probably way better options at the time, like, oh, I don't know, calling your friend over the phone? On to modern times. I don't think that the Switch has gone too crazy with the amount of accessories, especially considering this to be a hybrid console, but you best believe that there are some main ones. I was gonna add the Pokeball Plus to this list because it's kind of a glorified Pokemon ball catcher, but the fact that you can use it for Pokemon Go as well as an idle walker makes it way worth it. First, let's get them out of the way. The plastic Switch accessories that are used for sports games. Do I really need to elaborate why these are useless? Next is Nintendo Labo. Released as a Toys to Life gimmick, Labo's whole selling point was that you were able to build these really cool cardboard toy sets that you could play with on your Switch once you were done building them. There were 4 kits released that resulted in different cardboard toy sets. I don't really know what to call them. These being the Variety Kit with 2 RC cars, a fishing rod, a toy piano, a motorbike, and a house. The Robot Kit, allowing the builder to build a makeshift backpack in order to control a robot pretty much. The Vehicle Kit, being able to make steering controls for a car, plane, and submarine. And the VR Kit, which comes with a build of cardboard virtual reality goggles to turn your Switch into a VR machine. Although this set of toys/games managed to win awards, I don't think anyone is truly still playing with any of these kits many months after they build them. It's a different way to see the possibility you have when it comes to playing with your hybrid console, but I've bought too many items in my time to know that I'll buy it, play with it once, and then just have it sit. And sadly, that's how a lot of these accessories are. Once again, not all of them are truly totally useless paperweights, but for the most part, these accessories were ideas that should have been shot down from the start, sometimes being the quickest cash grab for the company. If you made it to the end of the video, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, all that. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.